Okay, good morning everyone. Boker Tov. Live from your favorite place in the world, Belarus. For the first ever recording Torah Anytime in Belarus. Torah Anytime has recorded in many locations all over the world, but never yet in Belarus. Okay, as we are headed toward Radin, perhaps for the highlight of our entire trip to be at the Makkah Menucha of the Holy Chafetz Chaim. One of the great lessons that the Chafetz Chaim taught is the value of time. Nitzul Hazman. Rabbi Ari Levine would say that he heard from the Chafetz Chaim. You know, the Gemara says, Eizehu shoita, who is a fool? The Gemara says in Chagig on Daf Daled. The Gemara says, Zeh ha'ma'abed kol ma shenoisen lo, someone who loses whatever you give to him. You know, there's an idea, if you have a bunch of kids, which kid gets the most money? You know, you're giving money out to the kids. Which kid gets the most money? The kid who has a wallet, the kid who's not going to lose the money. Because he's a chacham. Eizehu shoita, zeh ha'ma'abed kol ma shenoisen lo. The Chafetz Chaim would say, but there's nothing more valuable in this world than time. The Chafetz Chaim would say, Americans say, time is money. How foolish that is. Time is not money. What, the only value of time is that you can make money? Just the opposite. Money, the value of money, is money could be used to purchase time, to save time. In America, we evaluate time. How much money can I make in that time? No, that's not the proper attitude. Not time is money, just the opposite. Money is time. It's very interesting. When the Chafetz Chaim was scheduled to speak at a certain time, say 8 o'clock, so the Chafetz Chaim wouldn't start getting up to the podium at 8 o'clock. The Chafetz Chaim already made the move at 7:58, and at 8 o'clock sharp, on the dot, 8 o'clock and .00, the Chafetz Chaim began his scheduled drasha. You know, we're going to learn that the Chafetz Chaim passed away in 1933, 3 years earlier. The Granat, Rabbi Naftali Trapp, who, by the way, is buried right next to the Chafetz Chaim. After the Chafetz Chaim's kever was refurbished, they refurbished the kever of the Granat. The Granat fell deathly ill, and he was very beloved to his Talmidim. The Granat is one of the 4 Rosh Yeshivas that restored the Olam HaTorah. You know who they were? Who were the 4 Rosh Yeshivas who restored the Olam HaTorah? Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, Reb Shimon Shkab, Reb Baruch Ber, and Reb Naftali Trapp. And he became deathly ill, and he was very beloved to his Talmidim. And the Talmidim went around collecting time for the Granat. One Talmud was willing to donate a few months to the Granat. One Talmud said, I'll give him a week. One Talmud said 3 days. One Talmud said 8 hours. They came to the Chafetz Chaim, Rebbe, how much time will you donate to the Granat? The Chafetz Chaim pondered, the Chafetz Chaim thought. The Chafetz Chaim says, I will donate to the Granat Rega Echad. 1 minute. 1 minute I'll give to the Granat. That was the value the Chafetz Chaim placed on time. When word went out that the Chafetz Chaim was willing to give 1 minute, it created a great impression on the students. Somebody once visited the Chafetz Chaim, and he noticed that Chafetz Chaim's home was painted white, you know, like in an industrial building. Very simple, not an elegant paint. So he was asked, you know, Rabbi, why don't you use wallpaper? Chafetz Chaim said, wallpaper? You mean I should rip out pages of my Gemara and cover the walls of my house with blot of Gemara? So I said, no, Rabbi, that's not what I mean. I don't mean use the blot of Shas. I mean, there's something called wallpaper. You have beautiful paper that could cover the walls of your house. Chafetz Chaim says, how am I going to buy it? The person said, well, you have to go to work. And then, how am I going to get money? Well, somebody will pay you. But said the Chafetz Chaim, you mean, instead of learning Torah, I should go to work? So you want me to wallpaper my house with blot Gemara? Because instead of learning the blot Gemara, I should go to work to buy wallpaper. So I'm wallpapering my house with the blot Gemara. Actually, you know, before it was discovered that smoking was dangerous, the Chafetz Chaim already told Talmidim. He would say, Chaval ala kesef v'chaval ala zman, because you'd have to wrap the cigarette, and it would take a minute or two for each cigarette. You smoke 9 cigarettes a day, that's 18 minutes, that's many, many Blat Gemara a year. I'll just end this segment, and I think this is a good beginning. The Chafetz Chaim writes in the Mishnah Berurah, how early should a person get up before the Shacharis? Before the Shacharit? 30 minutes before the Veker comes, the Veker would come to bang on the shutters. As you all know, here in Belarus, they have shutters, and the Veker would come bang on the shutters. Chafetz Chaim writes, 30 minutes before the Veker comes to wake up, you need to start rising for Shachar. So one time, the Chafetz Chaim's grandson said, Zayda, how old are you? So the Chafetz Chaim ignored the question. So the kid dropped it. He figured, that Chafetz Chaim didn't want to answer the question. A little while later, the Chafetz Chaim gives his grandson an envelope of cash. What's the currency here in Belarus?
Ruble.
Ruble. He gave him bills. He gave him a wad of bills in a closed envelope. So the boy says, "Oh, thank you so much, Saidi." He slips it into his pocket. Chafetz Chaim says, "I don't understand. You're not counting. You're not opening up the envelope to see how much money is in the envelope." So first the kid said, first of all, Zayda, just the fact that you gave me a gift is so precious to me. It doesn't really matter how much money is in there. Second of all, it's really bad taste to start counting how much money is in the envelope as when the benefactor just gave it to you. Chafetz Chaim said the greatest gift we have in this world is time. And just like it's bad taste to look at how much cash is in the envelope, it's bad taste when somebody asks how old you are to start counting the years in front of the Ribbon Shalom as if you're trivializing. Just the fact that the Ribbon Shalom gave us life, that is such a dear and precious gift. It would trivialize it to start counting it like you're counting cash. This is one of the great teachings of the Chafetz Chaim, the great value of time. Okay, good morning everyone. We have the great zchus to be in the vicinity of the Chafetz Chaim, the author of Sefer Chafetz Chaim, and of course author of the Mishnah Berurah. The importance of the Mishnah Berurah in one of the basic Sfarim for every Jew. Rav Shlomo Volba writes, there are 4 Sfarim every Jew must know. Chumash and Rashi, Chumash and Ramban, Mesilas Yesharim, Rabbeinu Yoina and Pirkei Avos, and the Mishnah Berurah. Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, the psukim of the Mishnah Berurah are like it comes from the Lishkas Hagazis. You can't argue on it. It's like the Shulchan Aruch, the Magen Avram, the Gra, and the Mishnah Berurah. Ein lahar acharav, al yamin v'al smal. So on this occasion, I would like to share with you the very first Mishnah Berurah, and Sefer Mishnah Berurah. And we could think how these words are so appropriate of the Chafetz Chaim. The Mechaber says, Yisgaber ka'ari lamai b'avoker, one should rise like a lion to get up in the morning, says the Mishnah Berurah, ki lekach nivra ha'adam. That's what man was created for. K'may she'amar ha'kasav, kal ha'nikra v'shmi, v'lechvoidi b'rasev. Everything calls out in the name of Hashem and was created to bring honor to Hashem. That is the life of the Chafetz Chaim. That la'avoidas boiroi ki lekach nivra ha'adam. We walked into this room and we had a shiver. It's very cold over here, and it's May. Okay, it's May. You can imagine how cold it was in November. In November or December, the Mishnah Berurah continues. The Yitzhak is going to try to persuade you in the winter to say it's very cold outside. You could get a little bit of a picture what the Mishnah Berurah was talking about, what cold is, why a person might want to stay under the covers. By the way, if a person wants to be Mekayim, the first page of the Mishnah Berurah talks about the importance of washing your hands in the morning within your Dalet Amos. Mishnah Berurah brings various leniencies, and the Mishnah Berurah says, Ein lismay chalzeh ki im b'shas hadchak. Do not rely on them, but one should fulfill the halacha kipshutai, to wash Netilas Yadayim in the morning within one's 4 cubits. Mishnah Berurah also brings Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid. What does it mean, Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid? You should envision the Shem Havaya in front of your eyes with Nekudais. What are the Nekudais under the Shem Havaya? Yira, Chirik under the Yud, Shiva under the Hey, Kamatz under the Vav. A few halachas from the Mishnah Berurah that are noyeg, that are applicable every single morning. When you put on your talis in the morning, you should be mechavein to pater the talis katan. We put on a talis katan in the morning, but we don't make a bracha. But it's not so simple that you should make a bracha. Mishnah Berurah says when you put on the talis gadol, you should have kavana. When you make the bracha, you're patering the talis katan. Mishnah Berurah brings when you put on tefillin in the morning, you should make sure to add the kavana. You're putting on tefillin. Lamantia Tayras Hashem b'ficha. Mishnah Berurah also tells us that when you answer Amen, you should have an awareness what bracha you're answering Amen. So if you're answering Amen to a bracha of praise, you should have kavanah. You heard the bracha Poikeach Ivrim, you should say, I believe that Hashem is the one who gives sight to the blind. When you're answering Amen to a bracha of bakasha, you should have in mind, I believe that Hashem is choinen hadas, and I'm mispalel that Hashem is choinen hadas. And of course, the Mishnah Berurah says that the importance of Chazar Sashatz, that during Chazar Sashatz, one has to be intent on and focused on answering Amen. One cannot learn during Chazar Sashatz. Chaim Kanievsky even goes so far as to say, according to the Mishnah Berurah, to learn during Chazar Sashatz, it's a mitzvah haba va'avera. If you're maver sedra during that time, you'd have to do it again. So these are a few pointers from the Mishnah Berurah that has become Miskabel and Klal Yisrael as the Pesach Achroin. Zechusa Yagin Aleinu. Pesachenu Megadim to the Mishnah Berurah. You ready for this? The very first Mishnah Berurah says, La'avodas Voiroi. The Mishnah Berurah says, Ki lekach nivra ha'adam. Shenemar, Kal hanikra v'shmi v'lechvoidi. We were created to honor Hashem. The last Mishnah Berurah talks about whether you should make Yom Tif on Purim Katan. The Mishnah Berurah says you should commemorate it somewhat. Laharvois b'simcha, says the Mishnah Berurah in the final Mishnah Berurah. Laharvois l'chvoid hanes. So just like the Mishnah Berurah begins, we're created to honor HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he also ends likewise to be marbe b'simcha tzas on Purim Katan, l'chvoid, the miracle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Mishnah Berurah opens and closes with the same idea. Welcome to Yeshivas Radin. It's a beautiful, chilly day here in Radin. This was the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim. It was founded in 1869. The Chafetz Chaim was in his 30s. Can you imagine? He was in his 30s. He founded this yeshiva, which this area of Belarus is very undeveloped. It was not a convenient place to have amenities. It was not a convenient place to have donors, but it was a convenient place to put a yeshiva because there are no distractions over here. The enrollment remained very modest. Well, from the time the Chafetz Chaim began until the 1880s, when the Chafetz Chaim brought his son-in-law, Rav Hirsch Leib Levinson. Rav Hirsch Leib was a very tall man. The Chafetz Chaim was not even 5 feet tall. So to see the two of them together, it was a contrast. Rav Hirsch Leib was a tzaddik and a goyin, and he was very popular, and because of him, the enrollment really increased very much. In the year 1900, the Chafetz Chaim appointed Rav Moshe Lendinsky to be the Rosh Hashiva, and then in 1904, the Granad, Hagoyin Rav Naftali Trop, became the Rosh Hashiva of Radin. So the Chafetz Chaim was not the Rosh Hashiva, he was the owner of the yeshiva. He was the CEO of the yeshiva. He was not the Rosh Hashiva. When the Chafetz Chaim wanted to speak to the boys, more often than not, they would go to his house. But the Granad and the Chafetz Chaim had a very a mutually loving relationship. Maybe we'll talk about it more when we get to their Kvarim. But on this occasion, I want to share with you the famous drasha that the Granad gave the night of Slichais. Typically, the Rosh Hashiva would not be the one who would give the shmuzin. Usually it was a mashgiach. But the Chafetz Chaim was mechabe the Granad to say a shmuz the night of Slichais. And the Granat got up to the Amud, and this is recorded by Reb Shlomo Hyman, who is a Talmud Muvak of the Granat. And the Granat said on the words, the Granat said, Loi b'chesed, loi b'masim banu lefanecha, kedalim u'cherashim dafaknu d'lasecha. Not with kindness, not with good deeds do we come before you, but we come before you impoverished. Literally that means we tell Rebbeinu Shalom, we have no mitzvahs, we have no masim toivim. But says the Granat, Hagoin Rav Naftali Trop, it also means that comes Yomim Noraim. We cannot be confident with anything that we have. We cannot be confident that we have family. We cannot be confident that we have money. We cannot be confident that we have health. We're not a muchzik on anything. Kedalim u'cherashim dafaknu d'lasecha. This was a very stirring drasha that the Granat gave here in the Radin Yeshiva, the first night of Slichais. The Machon Kadosh, the place where Torah emanated to Klal Yisrael. And at this occasion, we're all mispal together. Hashem should open up all of our hearts. Psach libeinu b'soira secha. Probably the highlight of our trip is to be at the kever of the Chafetz Chaim, the saintly Chafetz Chaim. How could we possibly say the correct words at the Makom of the Chafetz Chaim? So many of us have mentioned the Shirkin family, the Rosen family, had family that learned by the Chafetz Chaim and feel a personal connection to the Chafetz Chaim, but all of Klal Yisrael has a personal connection to the Chafetz Chaim. Who has not improved their speech because of Sefer Chafetz Chaim, Sefer Shmiras Halashim? Who does not learn from the Sefer Mishnah Brura? Hagoyin HaTzadik, HaMefursam, L'chol Tzvutzos Hagoyla, L'moifes Hadar, Upiloi Asher Heir Einei Kol Yisrael. He illuminated the eyes of all of Klal Yisrael, B'Tayrasai, Tzidkasai, with his Torah, his righteousness, Umasav Ho'atzumim, and his awesome accomplishments. L'chvoid Hashem Tayrasai Va'amai. One of the last Talmidim of the Chafetz Chaim was Rav Mordechai Zuckerman, and he was once asked, the Chafetz Chaim lived in a dar deya, a dar of all-time great Gedolei Yisrael. What was it about the Chafetz Chaim that he rose up to be the greatest from among all of them? And Rav Mordechai Zuckerman gave many answers. Rav Mordechai Zuckerman said, first of all, the Chafetz Chaim was a great genius, and he devoted all of his iluyishkeit for avodas Hashem. Rav Mordechai Zuckerman said that in terms of the personal cheshbon hanefesh that the Chafetz Chaim made every night, he was unparalleled. Nobody made an accounting for their daily life the way the Chafetz Chaim did. In the biography of the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Aryeh Leib, his son, says that his father would always say, people have a business and they have books about the expenses and what comes in and what goes out. So why would a person not make a cheshbon hanefesh on their own life, which is so much more important than their business? Rav Mordechai Zuckerman said, in terms of being precise with time, not wasting even a moment of time, there was nobody like the Chafetz Chaim. Rav Mordechai Zuckerman said, at the end of the Chafetz Chaim's life, they brought him the Tehillim of his mother, the tear-drenched Tehillim of his mother. And the Chafetz Chaim cried when he saw the Tehillim of his mother. He said, this is what made me, this is what created me. We mentioned the Chafetz Chaim's father had 3 children with his first wife, and then the Chafetz Chaim's father's first wife passed away, and he remarried, and Chafetz Chaim's father and Chafetz Chaim's mother, the Brosha, had the Chafetz Chaim. Then the Chafetz Chaim's father passed away, and the Chafetz Chaim's mother remarried, Shimon from Radin. And Shimon from Radin had a daughter, and this girl was older than the Chafetz Chaim, and the stepfather wanted him to marry this older girl. And the Chafetz Chaim's brother says, what are you marrying an older girl for? She's the daughter of a simple guy. Marry the daughter of a Rosh Hashiva, marry the daughter of an Oishar. And the Chafetz Chaim, for the sake of the marriage of his mother, married this woman who the Chafetz Chaim said never asked him for anything, let him travel to sell his Svarim, supported his learning. Chafetz Chaim said, who knows what would have happened to him if he would have married the daughter of a wealthy businessman. They would have pulled him into the family business. But above all, says Rav Mordechai Zuckerman, what made the Chafetz Chaim so great is what it says here. Everything he did, every decision he made, was l'chvoid Hashem Tairasai v'amai, was to honor the Ribbon Shalom. And that's why the first words of the Mishnah Berurah, la'avodas barai, ki lekach nivra ha'adam, leman chvoid Hashem. One thing the Chafetz Chaim did is that he would be melitz for Klal Yisrael. One of the things he would say, Ribbon Shalom, look at every pasuk in the Chumash. Is there any pasuk in the Chumash that Klal Yisrael did not explain from the Rishonim, the Achronim? Is there even one word of the Chumash that there aren't hundreds of Perushim that Klal Yisrael was an Amel v'Yogea to explain this pasuk? Is there even one line of the Gemara that Klal Yisrael was not Amel v'Yogea to explain with countless Perushim? Is there even one Tosfos in Shas that Klal Yisrael wasn't Amel v'Yogea to explain Ribbon Shalom have Rachmanus on Klal Yisrael? So we could say b'makar benucha in the zchus of the holy Chafetz Chaim, say Ribbon Shalom, be merachem on the Jewish people, be merachem on all of us, to answer all of our tefillos. We all came here to be mispalel for personal needs in whatever inyan we're davening for, and the merit of the saintly Chafetz Chaim, who is always melitz on Klal Yisrael. May the Rebbe Hashem answer all of our tefillos. There's a list over here of all the Sfarim of the Chafetz Chaim. We have Sefer Chafetz Chaim, Shmiras Halashon, Mishnah Berurah, Machon Yisrael, Abbas Chesed, Shem Olam, Nidchei Yisrael, Likutei Halachos, Asifas Sekenim, Biur on the Torah's Kayanim, Torah Ar, Davar Be'itai, Chaymas Hadas, Torah's Habayis, Taras Yisrael, Geder Olam, Chayvas Hashmira, Beis Yisrael, Zachar LeMiriam, Sefer HaMitzvahs HaKatzer. But there's one empty space. They left one empty space. The Chafetz Chaim also wrote Tzipisa Yeshua. There's an empty space. So, Makom Hiniach Lanu Min HaShamayim Lehizgader Boi. They left us an open space. One of the reasons we wanted to come here is that we're publishing the Chafetz Chaim Sefer Tzipisa Yeshua. We came to be mispalel that it should come out with Hatzlacha, with the blessing and the Rishus of the Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim writes in Tzipisa Yeshua, he says, Adarabba, just the opposite. You think in the earlier generations there was a good chance for Mashiach to come? Adarabba, just the opposite. In our times, it's Yoiser Nira, it's more reasonable for us to anticipate the coming of Mashiach. The Chafetz Chaim paskind in Tzipisa Yeshua that it's more likely nowadays for the Mashiach to come. So we say, Ribbon Shalom, the Chafetz Chaim is in the Bezdin Shomala now. He paskind, he wrote in Tzipisa Yeshua, Adarabba, it's more likely now for Mashiach to come. So we hope we're mispal the Ribbon Shalom should accept that psak halacha, and the merit of us stirring the zechus of the Chafetz Chaim, we should all be zoicha to geula for everything that we're davening for, and Be'ezus Hashem, geulas Yisrael b'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Amen. Okay, we're here in Radin, right outside the oil of the Chafetz Chaim, where the Rosh Yeshiva of Radin, the Granat, who is Rosh Yeshiva from Taf Reish Samach Daled, 1904 to Taf Reish Samach Daled to Taf Reish Pei Tes, 1929. He was Rosh Yeshiva here for 25 years. On his 33rd birthday, Lamed Gimel, it's almost like Va'imer, Lamed on his 33rd birthday, he got a letter from Tzvi Hirsch Levinson on behalf of the Chafetz Chaim to come be the Rosh Yeshiva here in Radin. Aside from being a great Lamdan, the Granad is considered one of the 4 great Rosh Yeshivas who are making the oil of Torah, who established Torah in Klal Yisrael. Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Shimon Shkop, Reb Baruch Ber Leibowitz, and the granat. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said about his personality that he was an angel, his demeanor, his precious, his kedusha. He was considered to have perhaps the quickest and most creative mind in all of Europe. But he was especially devoted and loving of the Talmidim. Any good bacher was zoicha to have a personal chavrusa shaft with the granat in the yeshiva. Some of the afternoon, some of the night, some in the middle of the night. But the granat had a personal kesher with each bacher. One time, a bacher was telling the granat, I should come to the yeshiva because you know who my great-grandfather was, my grandfather is. The granat says, I don't need any of that. If you're in my yeshiva, then you're my son. And that's the greatest yichus. That's how the granat related to all the bachar in yeshiva. And when the granat fell ill, so he was so beloved to the Talmidim, as we mentioned, they all gathered together to donate life to their beloved Rosh Yeshiva. And the granat passed away in 1930. The Chafetz Chaim cried out, who will now protect Klal Yisrael? Imagine, Chafetz Chaim said when the granat passed away, who will protect Klal Yisrael? The granat, aside from being a great gun, he was also a great Baal Musar. He would learn Musar b'Hispilus. If anybody heard the granat learning Musar b'Hispilus, his soul stirred. Granat was so great in the world of Musar that the Alter of Slobodka chose him to be his son-in-law, and indeed he was engaged to the Alter's daughter. She passed away during the engagement, and the Alter wanted him to marry the next daughter, and he said no. He took it as a sign in Hashemayim that he wasn't Roy, and he married the daughter of a great Talmid Chacham in Europe. Our Rosh Yeshiva, was married to the granddaughter of the granat, the daughter of Rabbi Avram Trump. Actually, Rabbi Avram Trump became deathly ill, and the granat came to the Chafetz Chaim, and he said, please daven for my son. And the Chafetz Chaim poured out his heart on behalf of the granat, and he told this boy, Rabbi Avram, that if he dedicates his life to Torah, his life will be spared. And indeed, Rabbi Avram Trump, the son of the granat, his life was spared. He later became the Rosh Yeshiva in Stolin in New York, and his daughter was the Rebbetzin of Rav Henoch Leibowitz, Zeichat Tzak Levracha. That's the granat, Hagoyin Rav Naftali Truck, Zechusa Yagin Aleinu. Okay, we'll do one more. It's a great zechus to be here in Radin at the kever of Rav Baruch Yosef Feivelson, who is the son-in-law of Hagoyin Rav Naftali Truck, and his Mamala Makoim in the Radin Yeshiva. Rav Baruch Yosef Feivelson lived from 1895 to 1933. Son of Rabbi Meir Feivelson, son-in-law of the Granat, and one of the foremost Lamdonim in the Lithuanian yeshivas. He was one of the greatest Talmidim of Slobodka Yeshiva. He was a close Talmid of the Rav Yitzhak Panovitcher. And in 1929, he succeeded the Granat as a Rosh Yeshiva of Radin, and he was very successful. He gave very deep and dynamic Shiurim, and unfortunately he passed away at the age of 38 after giving shir for only 4 years. During World War II, his wife and children were exiled to Siberia. Some survived the war. He had a son who established a kollel in Yeshiva in Tzfas, and about 50 years after his passing, they published a sefer, 1983, Berchas Yosef, that has the haskama of many gedolim that show the great regard that Rav Baruch Yosef Feivelson was held, and the bright future that they hoped for him. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky writes, he's Meir, the Einayim of anyone who studied at the Radin Yeshiva. He was well known in the entire yeshiva world as a great Talmid Chacham and author of Chidushei Torah. And even though he died very young, he was considered one of the greatest Rosh Yeshivas in his time. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says that he remembers when Rav Feivelson was in Slobodka, he astounded the Talmidim with his sharpness, and he excelled more than any other Talmid in Slobodka. Rav Shach says that he knew him already from his youth in 1911 when he studied in Panovich. And Rav Shach says that the name of Rav Feivelson, together with Rav Yitzhak Panovitcher, their names, so to speak, were both legendary. So it's a great zechus to be here. Zechusa Yagein Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. It's a great zechus to be here in Radin at the kever of Rav Moshe Lendinsky, who is one of the Rosh Yeshivas in Radin. We spoke about it when we were standing in front of the yeshiva. He was born in 1862 and he passed away in 1938. He was born in a city near Bialystok to his father Reb David, and when he was a young man he was renowned, and he married one of the daughters of the wealthy people in his area. His father was hoping to see the son-in-law assume a very eminent position in Rabbanos, but when he realized that the son-in-law took upon himself not to accept the Rabbanos, so he made him a partner in his lumber business, eventually realizing that this son-in-law was destined only for the Beis HaMedrash. After marriage, Rav Moshe went to learn in Volozhin. He became a very close talmid of the Netziv, and at that point, the Chavetz Chaim invited him to become the Rosh Yeshiva in Radin. He was very attached to the Chavetz Chaim. He would travel with the Chavetz Chaim, and his surah was in the manner of the Chavetz Chaim, wearing a simple type of clothing that regular people wore. He did not wear big day Rabbanos. Rav Moshe Lendinsky would say over that when the Netziv was alive, he would always pour bitter tears for the tsaras of Klal Yisrael, and he was mispalel that Hashem should bring the kates and bring the Goyal Tzedek. And when the Netziv passed away, all the Talmidim thought he's going to go up to the Kisei HaKavod and arouse the Avos that Hashem should bring the Geula. Meanwhile, months passed, a half year passed, a year passed, and we didn't understand where was the Geula until somebody showed him. Somebody showed Rav Moshe Lendinsky from the Arizal that in this world we ask questions because all we see is Midas Hadin, but upstairs in Hashem's Heichal, it's Kulai Chesed and Kulai Rachamim, and there are no questions. Based on this, Rav Moshe Lendinsky explained the pasuk in Tehillim Parak Mem Ches pasuk Yud. Diminu Elokim Chastecha Bekarav Heichalecha. Diminu Elokim. In this world, Diminu, we thought it was Elokim Midas Hadin. But in reality, Chastecha Bekarav Heichalecha. Your chesed is in your palace. Where Hashem is, it's Kulai Chesed. One of his notable son-in-laws was Rabbi Yisrael Moshe Solomon, the author of Nesivas Bakodesh, who became known as the Rav of Charkov. Rabbi Moshe Lendinsky passed away, Taf Reish Ches Tzadik, in 1938. Zechusai Yagein Aleinu. Okay, we're here in the Radin Cemetery, and there's a monument to commemorate the 2,130 Jews who were slaughtered and buried in this mass grave. We're actually here in a way on their yard site because they were murdered, they were massacred 1942 on May 10th. That was yesterday, but we couldn't come on Shabbos, so we came the next possible day. It's Ki'ilu, we came on their yard site. I don't know if anybody ever, whether these neshamas ever had anybody come on that exact date. So we're here to commemorate their lives. We're going to make a kelmale. L'zeichem nishmasam. Kelmale rachamim, sheichem b'amiroimim, hamseim nucha nechayna, kanfei ashchina, b'malois, kedoshim atayrim, k'zara Harakiah masirim, es nishmaiseyem, Shal Yoshvei Radin Shenirtzachu B'Makom Zeh Yidei Garmanim V'Yizreim Shemosru Nafshem HaKadoshas Hashem V'Gan Eden Teimenu Chasam Lachim B'Malachamim Yastireim Zezir Knafav Lo'ilamim Yitzar B'Sar Chaim Es Nishloiseyem Adonai Yunach Alasam Yunach Amishkavam Yishalahim Neimer Amen. Okay, friends, we just had the zechus of a lifetime to be at the kever of Rabbeinu Yisrael Meir HaKohen, the Baal Chavetz Chaim. What a wondrous opportunity! What a zechus that we had to be in this very special place. I want to tell you about a historic meeting that took place in 1874 between the Chavetz Chaim and one of the all-time great Gaonim. The Chavetz Chaim revered Rabbi Meir Leibish ben Yechiel Michal, the Malbim. He admired his amazing intellect, his godless b'Torah. The Chafetz Chaim would say, "Vi nemt men hakopf, vi der Malbim." Who could ever imagine a head like the Malbim? The Mishabura quotes the psukim of the Malbim very regularly. The Malbim wrote the Artzos HaChaim, and the Chafetz Chaim quotes his psukim. He was especially fond of the Malbim's commentary to Torah's Kayanim. In fact, the Chafetz Chaim writes that we are not on the level to understand how Chazal made drashos. You know, sometimes the Gemara will say, "Al tikri this, al tikri banayach ela boinayach." What do you mean al tikri? Why shouldn't you read it that way? The Malbim was, the Chafetz Chaim said only a Gadol b'Yisrael like the Malbim could understand how Chazal made drashos. So now, in 1874, the Tsar made a law that obligated any man from 21 years old to be conscripted in the army for 6 years, from age 21 to age 27. The problem was that most Jews got married at either 18 years old or maybe as late as up to 20 years old. And now, would it make sense for a young boy to get married at 18 or 20 when they're going to be taken away to the army for 6 years? So they changed the policy. They delayed getting married. Most young men now got married at 27 when their conscription was finished. And the Chafetz Chaim felt this was not a great idea. In fact, in Poland, you see, the reason why they delayed getting married is, first of all, who could have a head for marriage when they know they were going to be away from home for 6 years? The father of the girls didn't want to give their daughters away in marriage because they're leaving their daughters like living almanos for 6 years. And who knows, when the guy comes back, who knows if he'll still be religious. However, the Hasidim in Poland continued to marry off their sons at 18 years old, 20 years old, because of the following philosophy. The mazel of 2 is better than the mazel of 1. Mazla debate trey adif. So they figured the mazel of 2 sets of parents would help bail out this boy from any dangers in the army. And plus, if he was married, he was, so to speak, tied down to a wife, and that would keep him loyal to Torah mitzvahs. So in Poland, they continued to get married at age 18 or 20. The Chafetz Chaim held that even though boys were being drafted, they need to continue to get married at 18 and 20 years old, and this way they'll be able to preserve their tahara, and these young men will be tied down to a family, to a woman, and that will keep them on the straight and narrow. And the Chafetz Chaim wrote a kol koirei that from now on Jews have to go back to the traditional age of marriage, 20, 18, irrespective of being drafted in the army. The problem was that because of censorship, the Tsar did not allow this kol koirei to be published, because for him, he felt the Russian army was better off drafting single men rather than married men. So the Chafetz Chaim could not publish it in Radin. So he went to Prussia, to a city called Eidkunon, and he published it there. While there, he had a historic meeting with the Malbim, and he asked the Malbim to sign on his kol koirei that boys should get married at 20 to 21. What's the shidduch crisis? What are they saying now? They want the boys to get married
after 12th grade.
Younger. So the Chafetz Chaim said the boys have to revert back to getting married younger. The Malbim did not give a haskama to the Chafetz Chaim. The Malbim disagreed with the Chafetz Chaim. However, the Chafetz Chaim had a historic meeting with the Malbim, and the Malbim, as reported by Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, poured out his heart to the Chafetz Chaim of all the troubles he was having. They were roidef him. The Malbim was chased out of many different cities by the Reform. The Malbim had a very tragic life. The Malbim says in his life it was fulfilled. Bal karchach ata chai. And the Chafetz Chaim commiserated with the Malbim, empathized with the Malbim, was mechazik the Malbim. In the end, the Malbim became very ill in Kiev, and the Chafetz Chaim came to visit him. And the Chafetz Chaim bought from the Malbim al HaTorah the 5-volume commentary of the Malbim al Torah that was very dear to the Chafetz Chaim. For his whole life, the Chafetz Chaim would boast, this set of Malbim I bought from the Mechaber himself, Rabbi Meir Leibish ben Yechiel Michal. This is the historic meeting between the Chafetz Chaim and the Malbim. Okay, we're here at the Volozhiner Yeshiva, the original site of the Volozhiner Yeshiva. It was redone by the government, but this is a very important sign, 1806. That means the building, the Volozhin building, was built in 1806. The yeshiva started in 1803. This is the brainchild of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. He proposed the idea to the Goin while the Goin was still alive, and at first the Goin says, it's not right. It's not time to open up the Volozhin Yeshiva. But then 5 years later, he again proposed it to the Gra, and the Gra says it's time to open up the Yeshiva. The Yeshiva was not opened until 5 years later, after the Goin's Patira. So it was opened up in the year 1803. You have to understand, before Reb Chaim Volozhiner, there was no concept of Yeshiva in Klal Yisrael. Young students would study with the Rav, with the Rebbe in the shul, and then at age 13, most students would go on to work, and a few select students who showed promise in their learning would continue learning under the tutelage of a Rebbe or a Rav. There was no formalized education in the Jewish people. Reb Chaim Volozhiner saw the influence of the Haskalah, and there would be no continuity for Judaism if there was not formalized, mandatory study for children beyond the age of 13 with a set curriculum. It could not be that each Rav just taught whatever he was interested in, whatever the student was interested in. And the idea of yeshivas in Klal Yisrael, which really maintained and preserved Judaism for Klal Yisrael, was the creation of Reb Chaim Volozhiner with the blessing of the Goin. Began in 1803. This building started in 1806. Reb Chaim Volozhiner was the first Rosh Yeshiva from 1803 until 1821, when he was taken over by his son, Reb Itzela of Volozhin. If you look in the introduction of the Nefesh HaChaim, that was written by Reb Itzela of Volozhin. We'll hear more about the history inside, but just I wanted to mention this by this important sign. Okay, we're here in the refurbished Volozhin Yeshiva. We're continuing with the history of the Volozhin Yeshiva, which was opened in 1803. The building was opened in 1806. The Reb Chaim Volozhiner served as the first Rosh Yeshiva until 1821. His son, Rav Itzela of Volozhin, who is mentioned in the introduction, he wrote the introduction of Nefesh HaChaim, he became the next Rosh Yeshiva. Rav Itzela was very involved in communal affairs, and it's very interesting to note that he worked hand in hand with the Tzemach Tzedek of Lubavitch, going many times to St. Petersburg to speak to the government on behalf of Jewish needs. Because Rav Itzela of Volozhin, the son of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, was very involved in communal affairs, his son-in-law, his two sons-in-law, really served at the helm of the yeshiva. Who were the two son-in-laws of Rav Itzela of Volozhin? Number one, Rabbi Eliezer Isaac Fried, who became Rosh Yeshiva at age 30. And the other son-in-law was the more reticent Naftali Tzvi Yehuda of Berlin. Of the two, between Rabbi Eliezer Isaac Fried and the Netziv, Rabbi Eliezer Isaac Fried was much more popular. So he assumed the role as the main Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. And so, when Rabbi Itzela of Volozhin passed away, the mantle of Rosh Yeshiva Shaft, the mantle of Rosh Yeshiva Shaft was taken over by Rabbi Eliezer Isaac Fried in the year 1849. The only thing was, Rabbi Eliezer Isaac Fried was very sickly. So after 4 years, he passed away, and the Netziv becomes the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. So you'd expect it would be unanimous that the Netziv should be the Rosh Yeshiva. However, Rabbi Eliezer Isaac Fried had a son-in-law by the name of Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Beis Halevi. And the Beis Halevi's Shiurim dazzled the Talmidim. So now there became somewhat of a rivalry between the son-in-law of Rabbi Itzela of Volozhin and the grandson of Rabbi Itzela of Volozhin, the Beis Halevi. So they basically split the role of the Rosh Hashiva. But this became an untenable situation, as you can imagine. You're going to have the Netziv, and you're going to have the Beis HaLevi. Who's responsible for the finances of the yeshiva? You know, because after all, the Rosh Hashiva is the one who's responsible to support the yeshiva. So they convened a Bezdin. Who was on the Bezdin? Number one, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. Number two, the Nachlas David, Rabbi David Tevel. Number three, Rabbi Yosel Slutzker. Number four, the Maggid of Vilna. The Maggid of Vilna, Rabbi Velvel, he said, you know what this feels like to me? It feels like Parshas Vayeshev. Why Parshas Vayeshev? Because if you look in Bereshis, there's contention between Adam and the snake, good and bad. In Noach, good and bad, Noach and the people. Parshas Lech Lecha, Abraham and Terach. Then you have Abraham and Yishmael, Yitzchak and Yishmael, Yaakov and Esav. There's always a fight between good and evil. Not until Parshas Vayeshev is it the fight between good and good, Yosef and the brothers. So says the Maggid of Vilna, the fight between the Netziv and the Beis HaLevi is Parshas Vayeshev. Ultimately, the Bezdin paskin that both the Netziv and the Beis HaLevi could give shir, but the mantle of Rosh Hashiva Shaft went to the Netziv. But the Beis HaLevi very soon stepped down, and he started the Brisk dynasty, and the Netziv now is at the mantle of the Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin. However, the Netziv's granddaughter marries the Beis HaLevi's son. Okay, so in the contention between the Beis HaLevi and the Netziv won. The Beis HaLevi stepped down, but the Beis HaLevi has a son, Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim marries the Netziv's granddaughter. So the Netziv invites Reb Chaim, the Beis HaLevi's son, to come back to Volozhin. And they both split the Shiurim in Volozhin between the Netziv and Reb Chaim. Now, the approaches to learning of the Netziv and Reb Chaim were polar opposites. Reb Chaim held, if you understand one blot of Shas, you know the whole Shas. The Netziv held, if you know the whole Shas, you can understand one blot of Shas. The Netziv held, you can't understand one blot unless you know the whole Shas. The Reb Chaim held, if you know one blot, you know the whole Shas. This was the two different pathways of learning in Volozhin. Now actually, Volozhin had a different system than any other yeshiva at the time. You see, in some yeshivas, they learn sugyas. So let's say you're learning Ksubis, you'll learn Tainas Pesulim, then you'll jump to Avelos, and you'll jump to Psikrei Shiloi Nichale, and you'll jump to Daftas Svek Sveika, and then Bari V'Shema. In some yeshivas, they learn straight, and they focus on sugyas. In Volozhin, they learned Kol HaTorah Kula. Every area was treated equally. You learn the whole Masechta from beginning to end. You learn Mechilta. You learn Sifra. The Netziv gave Shiurim on Chumash and Rashi. Hence, the Netziv's Perush, Hamek Davar. Don't be fooled by the Hamek Davar edition in that glass case. This was not the original edition of the Hamek Davar. But this is a little bit of the background of the yeshiva. In the year 1887, the government forced the yeshiva to have Russian in their curriculum. So they try to be yotzei by taking a minyan of Bachrim, sending them across the street, and whichever Bachrim wanted to dabble in that, the Rosh Yeshivas allow them across the street to learn a few other subjects. But eventually, this was not enough for the government. So the yeshiva had to make a decision. Can the yeshiva remain open because the government was demanding secular studies from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And a Bezdin was convened. And you know who ultimately was on that Bezdin? The Beis HaLevi. And it was decided that the Volozhin yeshiva has to close down. And they opened up the Aron, and they took out the Sifrei Torah, and they marched the Sifrei Torah out of Volozhin, and the doors were locked, and that was the end of the Volozhin yeshiva. And they would go early in the morning, and they would see footsteps in the snow, and they would see every morning the Netziv would come to the yeshiva, brokenhearted, crying at the door that his beloved Beis Hamikdash had to be closed. Ultimately, the Netziv heads to Eretz Yisrael, but he became deathly ill in Warsaw, and he passed away in Warszawa. He's buried in the Warsaw Cemetery. And you know who's buried right next to him? Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik is buried right next to the Netziv. But the Chafetz Chaim said that the closing of the Volozhin Yeshiva was the birth of Torah for Klal Yisrael, because from there it spawned many yeshivas all over Europe, and this is the mother of all yeshivas. And even in its closing, it gave birth to many, many yeshivas that came from the Volozhin Yeshiva. Okay, one of the main teachings of Reb Chaim Volozhiner are the ramifications of the actions of a Jew. Chaim Volozhiner asks a famous question. Why is it that when Titus went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, when Titus went into the Holy of Holies, nothing happened? He took a Sefer Torah and he committed the unspeakable act in the Holy of Holies on a Sefer Torah, and nothing happened. And yet, we have an idea that when a Jew has even one improper thought, it has a more severe ramification in the universe than what Titus did in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So Nefesh HaChaim teaches that the Jew is linked to all the Olamos Ha'alyanim, all the supernal worlds, all the upper worlds. And every mitzvah that we do, and every act, every maisa of Torah that we learn, every act of chesed that we do, brings great light to all the upper worlds. You know, we have an expression, Yira Shamayim. Yeah, what does Yira Shamayim mean? Most people translate it, fear of heaven. Fear of heaven. What does that mean, fear of heaven? Most people think it means fear of Hashem. No, says the Nefesh HaChaim. Yira Shamayim doesn't mean fear of God. Yira Shamayim means fear of the ramifications of your actions in heaven. So they did a good job over here. One of the great teachings of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the Nefesh HaChaim, v'zois Torahs ha'adam. This is the great Torah of man. Kol ish Yisrael, al yoymar b'libay chas v'shalom. Nobody should say, ki ma ani, who am I? U'ma koichi lifo b'masay ha'shvalim, shumini ba'olam. What is the strength of my actions to effectuate any ramification in this world? Amnam, yavin v'yeda, you should understand and know. V'yikva b'machshavos libay, and establish in the thoughts of his mind, shekol pirtei masav, that all the details of his actions, v'diburav, and his words, v'machshavosav, and his thoughts, kol eis v'rega, every hour, every moment, lo yisavidu chas v'shalom. Every act of a Jew has universal ramifications through all the oilamos. It says, begivei maroimim, ba'oilamos, v'tzachtzachos ha'aretz ha'alyanim. This is one of the great teachings of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. He would say, Da mala mala mimcha, you should know everything that happens in the upper world. Mimcha, it's from you. It's from you. Yira Shamayim doesn't mean fear of God. Yira Shamayim means fear of the ramifications of your actions in the upper world. Manoira Makom Azel, what an awesome Makom that we stand at. The Tzion L'Nefesh Chaya, Or Olam, the light of the world. Hagoyin Hagado B'Doiroi, Rabbeinu Chaim. Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the author of Nefesh HaChaim. Ruach Chaim on Pirkei Avos. Reb Chaim Volozhiner passed away on Yodalid Sivan, 1821, Tavkov Pei Aleph. What's interesting is who remembers what day Reb Chaim Volozhiner was born? He was born on the day of the execution of the Ger Tzedek of Vilna, which was the second day of Shavuos, Zayin Sivan, 1749. So he was born on Zayin Sivan, he passed away on Yadalat Sivan. The Gemara tells us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mamalei Shnoiseyem Shel Tzadikim Miyoim Liyoim. Hashem fulfills the years of the Tzadikim from day to day. In other words, Tzadikim are born and pass away on the very same day. So the student of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, Reb David Tevel, the Nachas David asked, so why was Reb Chaim Volozhiner, he was born on Zayin Sivan and he passed away Yodalat Sivan. Doesn't Hashem make Tzadikim he creates them and he takes them away on the very same day. Says Reb David Tevel, it's because a person is really born on the day of their Milah. So Reb Chaim Volozhiner was born on Zayin Sivan. His Milah was Yudalet Sivan, so he passed away on the very same day he was born. So Reb David Tevel asks, but Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech, they were born and passed away on the very same day. No, because they were born mahol, they were born circumcised already. Reb Chaim Volozhiner, he was born on Zayin Sivan, 1749. He passed away 1821 on Yudalet Sivan. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner in the Nefesh HaChaim, Shar Daled, Parak Yud Aleph. V'ho emes bilti safei klal. There is no doubt. Shem haya ha'olam mikatzeo ad katzeo panoi chas v'shalom af rega echad mamish meha esek v'hezvainanus shalanu b'toira karega. If there would be a moment of time that somewhere in the world someone was not learning Torah, the whole world would cease to exist. The world would disintegrate. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, when we say that the Torah is the life force of the world, it's a Torah as Chaim, literally, what pumps vitality into the world is Limud Torah. And therefore in Volozhin, Reb Chaim Volozhiner instituted that there were mishmarim learning Torah around the clock. Reb Chaim Volozhiner famously said that's the reason for time zones, so that when the Jews in America are getting up, then the Jews in Eretz Yisrael could go to sleep. The reason for time zones is so that 24 hours a day, there's always Torah being pumped into the world. Legend has it, the mother of Reb Chaim Volozhiner used to house someone who would ultimately become one of the Rabbeim of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, namely the Shagas Aryeh. And when it came time for the mother of Chaim Volozhiner to give birth, she didn't want to disturb the Shagas Aryeh. So she went off into the corner to give birth, so as not to cause any cessation to learning the Shagas Aryeh. Shagas Aryeh saw the care that she had, that his learning should not be interrupted. He was Mavarech, the mother of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, that she should be Zaycha to a son whose Kol Torah will fill the whole world. But according to what we're saying, she was Zaycha to have someone who instituted that the Kol Torah would never cease in the entire world, because he taught the world that what the world stands on is Limud Torah. Actually, there's another version of the story that she wanted her child to hear the learning of the Shagas Aryeh as he would be born. So he was born, the Nefesh HaChaim, Reb Chaim Volozhiner was born to the Kol Torah of the Shagas Aryeh. Ultimately, the Nefesh HaChaim learned by the Shagas Aryeh. He learned by Rabbi Rafal Hamburg, but his life was changed at age 19 when he became the primary disciple of the Vilna Gaon. At age 26, he became the Rav here in Volozhin. He opened the yeshiva in 1803. I want to just share with you two things that the Nefesh HaChaim teaches. The Nefesh HaChaim teaches us, if you look at the introduction to Nefesh HaChaim, Itzula of Volozhin, he says that his father would always tell him, this is the purpose of man. Man was not created for themselves, but to benefit and to help others in whatever capacity possible. That one of the great teachings and lessons of Reb Chaim Volozhiner is that man was not created for himself, but to benefit as many and others as possible. You know, it's interesting. The Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu only gives wisdom to the wise. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu noisein chachma ela l'chachamim. Shenemar yahiv chachmasa l'chakimim. God only gives wisdom to the wise. So the Nefesh Chaim asks, so how does somebody get the first bit of wisdom? If God only gives wisdom to the wise, how do you get the first piece of wisdom? And then Nefesh Chaim says the first piece of wisdom is Yiras Shamayim. Yiras Shamayim, Reishis Chachma, Yiras Hashem. In order to acquire Chachma in this world, one needs Yiras Shamayim. What bracha do we make on a Chacham Yisrael? Asher Nasan Mechachmasai Lireav. He who gives from his wisdom to who? Those who fear him. Yiras Shamayim is the receptacle to Chachma. The more Yiras Shamayim you have, the more Chachma you could have. Nefesh HaChaim says, what is our attitude to our Torah? We say the Torah is Eitz Chaim Hi. It is a tree of life to who? Lamachazikim ba. To those who grab a hold of her. It says in Nefesh HaChaim. Imagine somebody who fell into a raging river and is threatened to be taken down by the river, to be drowned by the river. And the person is about to go under, and he sees there's a branch from a tree overhanging the river. And he knows if he grabs a hold of this branch, it could save his life. How is he going to hold that branch? Is he going to say, well, I'm a righty, let me try with my left hand, with my left pinky, and see if I could rescue myself? No, that person is going to grab onto that tree with all of his might and all of his energy, and he's not going to let go at all. Says in Nefesh HaChaim, this world is a torrent, is a raging river that threatens to take us under. But we have a salvation, and that salvation is the Torah. But the Torah will only save us if we embrace it, b'chol leiv u'b'chol nefesh. Eitz Chaim Hi, Reb Chaim Volozhiner taught us, Eitz Chaim Hi, the Torah is a tree of life, but only lamachazikim ba, to those who grab it with all of their heart and all of their soul. Zechusay Yagein Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael.
Even the fathers.
Okay, tonight is Yudalet Iyar. Yudalet Iyar is Pesach Sheni. And traditionally, Pesach Sheni is considered the Yom HaDehilula of Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes. Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes.
You say Tachnah Mincha?
Yeah, we do say Tachnah Mincha. Oh, because of Pesach Sheni? It's a question. But, you know, there's a tradition that we have that if somebody loses an object, you pray to find it in the merit of Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes. You know, you lose your car keys, you lose something else, just making sure I have everything on me. You know, I don't even want to, you lose your toothbrush, you lose your socks. You invoke the merit of Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes, you say, Lakad Meir Aneni, and in the merit of Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes, we hope Hashem will help us find our lost object. So what's the connection between Rabbi Meir and your toothbrush? I mean, why is it Rabbi Meir's problem that you lost your car keys? You know, we don't invoke Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Gamliel. Why do we invoke Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes if somebody loses an object? So we always like to say over, you know, the physical world is a reflection of the spiritual world. We all know that Rabbi Meir has a well-known opinion in Shas that, in contradistinction to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that our relationship with Hashem is conditional, that we're only considered Hashem's children if we act like Hashem's children, Rabbi Meir holds what, Avi? Benkach u'benkach nekra banim lamakom. We're always considered the beloved children of Hashem. So that means a Jew is never lost. You know, if a Jew is always considered the beloved child of Hashem, no matter how far he strays, he could always come back because he's always considered the child of Hashem. So if in the spiritual world a Jew is never lost, in the physical world nothing is ever lost. Your toothbrush is never lost for good. Your car keys are never lost for good. If a Jew is never lost, if in the spiritual world you're never lost, in the physical world you're never lost either. That's why on Pesach Sheni, these Jews who didn't have the opportunity to bring the Pesach Rishon, but they said, Lama nigara, why should we be cast away? Why should we lose our opportunity? And this is something we see here in the city of Minsk. You know, for 70 years, communism shut down any vestige of Jewish observance, and all of a sudden, the Iron Curtain falls, and they have centers for giving out matzos, and thousands of Jews who you would have thought would have been lost forever, they return. How is such a thing possible? It's because of what Rabbi Meir taught. Benkach u'benkach nekram banim. So is there any more opportune time to be here in the city of Minsk than Erev Pesach Sheni, the great day of Benkach u'benkach nekram banim? That's what we see all these thousands of Yidden here in Minsk. They're returning to reclaim their status of Banim Lamakai.
Beautiful.
Okay, we're here in Minsk. We're at the memorial where 5,000 Jews were killed on March 2nd, 1942. I want to point out the Hebrew date of this terrible pogrom. It was Purim, 1942. Can you imagine? Nazis, Haman, killed 5,000 Jews on Purim. This is a memorial to what we read in Megillah Esther. Ki kisav asher nichtav b'shem hamelech v'nachtoim b'tavat hamelech ein lahashiv. When God ratified the decree of Haman, it could not be rescinded. And it came out during different periods in history. So for example, we have a tradition in the Megillah, there's a big Taf and Ches because the decree of Haman came out in 1648, 1649. Likewise, if this tragedy happened on Purim, this must have been a remnant of the decree of Haman himself. We know that the Jewish people 5 years later took revenge against the Nazis on Purim. But if they were able to kill us on Purim, this is because this is the decree of Haman himself. Is one of the reasons why we fast on Tainus Esther is because Haman's decree is looming every year. Usually we're successful in abolishing it, but unfortunately March 2nd, 1942, this memorial is a testimonial to what we read in the Megillah, that the decree of Haman is looming annually. Okay friends, we're here in Minsk at Dynamo Stadium. You may ask, why are we here at Dynamo Stadium? This was the site of the burial of the Jewish community and many tzaddikim, most notably the Seder HaDoros, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who lived from 1660 to 1746. Now, very interestingly, you know who else was here in Minsk? The Shagas Aryeh. And the question is, who's going to be the Rav in Minsk? The Seder HaDoros or the Shagas Aryeh? The Shagas Aryeh said if the Torah would ever be forgotten, I would restore it with my pilpul. But the Seder HaDoros said if the Torah would ever be forgotten, I would restore it with my stories. And the Seder HaDoros became the Rav here in Minsk. He wrote a classic sefer called Seder HaDoros. Seder HaDoros is such an important sefer. The Chida wrote footnotes on Seder HaDoros. So the Chida didn't make it here to Eastern Europe. However, the Chida did write Hagois on Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi's Seder HaDoros. The Chida does criticize the Seder HaDoros regarding his quoting Sefer Shalshelas HaKabbalah, which the Chida says is not a reliable Sefer. Very interesting, there's a legend regarding the kever of the Seder HaDoros. Legend has it that it sunk in the ground, it became illegible. When the communists came, they destroyed the entire cemetery except for that one kever. There is such a legend, but then when the Nazis came, the entire area was destroyed. But the Seder HaDoros, the importance of it and that particular sefer lives on. It's part of the rich legacy of Jewish literature. It's a sefer that every Jew needs to be familiar with. It has a list of all the Gedolim that lived from the beginning of time until the year 1696. It was until 1696. It has a lot of information al pi Kabbalah about many of the Gedolim that lived, including their Gilgulim. So this was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the author of the Seder HaDoros, Rav here in Minsk. Besides the Seder HaDoros and the Shagas Aryeh, you had a student of the Shagas Aryeh, Rabbi Raphael Hamburger, was a Rav here in Minsk. You also had the Nachlas David, Rab David Teva. Nachlas David was a student of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. He wrote Nachlas David on Shas, and Beis David, Drashos Beis David, which are classic drashos that follow in the rich Mesorah of the Vilna Gaon. So all these Gedolim grace this great city of Minsk. May their memory be a blessing for Klal Yisrael. Friends, this is where we say goodbye. It's been a great pleasure and a great honor to spend the last couple of days together. We had really the zechus of a lifetime to be in remarkable places, starting with, we were together in Panovich, by the Panovich Yeshiva. We went together to Dvinsk, to the kever of the Ar Sameach and the Rugged Shavar. We were in Vilna. We were at the kever of Baruch Bar Leibowitz. We were at the grave of the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Avram ben Avram, Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grozinski. We had a beautiful Shabbos together. We were in the synagogue in Vilna. Baruch Hashem, we came here to Belarus. We were Zoicha to daven at the yeshiva in Radin, to be at the kever of the Chafetz Chaim, to be at the kever in Volozhin of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, to be in the yeshiva of Volozhin, and to be here in Minsk, and to be in a place where great Gedolim grace this city. So we hope, Be'ezus Hashem, this is just the beginning of your journey. Now that we visited these Gedolim, you will certainly see how next time you learn from Sefer Mishnah Brura, you learn from Nefesh HaChaim, you learn from the Ar Sameach, the Meshech Chachma, Sifrei Rugged Shavar, you will see how these Svarim will be coming to you. You'll have new insight in them. You'll appreciate their history. Be'ezus Hashem, these Gedolim should be melitz for you, for all of your mishpachas, all your tefillah should be neskabel. Barachimim of Ratzain, and we look forward to spending many more happy journeys together. B'siyata d'shmaya. Thank you very much.